Hello, everyone. And first of all, thank you so much for coming. And as always, thank you so much for being a part of Untapped. I can't tell you how much it means to us and how grateful we are for everything. So, real quickly, before we start this presentation, I want to lay out what this semester is going to look like for parent presentations. There's going to be some solo presentations like this, and then we're going to have some guest speakers on as well. So next month, we're going to have one of the top college consultants in the country come in and talk to us about the college process. So what does that look like? When should it start? What skills should we start building now? And just to wrap our brains around this college process. We're also going to have an expert come in on anxiety and talk to us and have a couple unique ways to look at anxiety. And then I'm going to do a couple solo presentations. One of those presentations is going to be going from good to great on executive function skills and what that looks like. So often we get stuck in this remedial phase. So just so you know, as a thank you to all of our parents and to give the best possible service, we're going to continue to have parent presentations the first Thursday of every single month. So let's talk about tonight. If you were here at the beginning of the semester, last semester, a lot of this will be a review for you. But at the beginning of each semester, we like to just go back and review and talk about the basics of executive function skills. So often, we get too high level and we just want to get back to the basics tonight. So we're going to talk about how to prepare for a successful semester. I'm going to give a quick introduction and review of what these executive function skills are. Then we're going to talk about what steps we can take after a successful semester, and then what steps we can take after an unsuccessful semester. And again, there's no such thing as a 100% successful semester or 100% unsuccessful semester. So I hope you can take insights from both, but there's some conversations that are just much easier to have after a successful semester. As I go through this, I'm going to stop at the end and answer some questions. And so feel free to put any questions in the chat or in the question and answer section, and we'll be monitoring that as well. So let's begin. Real quick background. If you do not know me, I am the founder of Untapped Learning, and I was diagnosed with hyperactive ADHD at a young age. I always describe it as the best type of ADHD because I got a lot of attention. People noticed me versus those who get diagnosed later on, who that always breaks my heart. But I had significant academic struggles throughout elementary, middle school, and high school. But it wasn't until college, till I left Colorado and went out to Ohio to play football, that things just really melted down for me. And I had to do a lot of hard work on these executive function skills. So that is what Untapped is based upon: is how can we help students, give them the skills to be successful and independent before they run into hard times. So that's who I am, and that is my origin story. Let's talk about what executive function is, though. Let's give a quick review. It's become a buzzword in education in the parent community right now. So let's talk about what these skills are. Your executive function skills are just your complex set of skills that all work together so you can achieve your goals. This could be a big goal, like maybe you want to get into a certain type of university, or you want to become a welder, or maybe you want to be star of the musical. It's your executive function skills that all work together, help you break down that goal into daily actionable steps and keep you on track to reaching that goal. But it can also help you reach small goals. Things like, I want to pay attention, or I want to remember to turn in my homework even though I already did it. Whatever that goal is, it's your executive function skills that help you complete that goal. Here is what they are comprised of. The first one, time management, we're going to talk a lot about tonight. Next, we look at organization. And again, this isn't just physical organization, it's also digital organization. Can we find documents that we complete, or do we have a list of 100 untitled documents in our Google Drive? Can we find the email that we've been looking for? So there's a digital organization aspect, but it's also the organization of our thoughts. So, when we have a big presentation or a big paper, can we organize our thinking to get it all out the way we need to? So that's organization. We're going to talk about how we can improve attention, impulse control, and then task initiation, which is just a fancy word for getting started or not procrastinating. And this is a huge challenge for a lot of students and professionals at the moment. We'll talk about what we can do for that. Your executive function also involves your emotional regulation, flexibility, planning and problem solving, verbal and working memory, and then your metacognition or your self-assessment. The ultimate gift that we can give our kids is the ability for them to understand themselves. They think differently. They often, their mind just works differently. And if they understand that, that's when we see these individuals thrive. So this is what your executive function skills are. Out of everything that we could focus on, why do we focus on these executive function skills? Well, there's been a lot of research that's come out recently on these skills, and one of the core ones is from the Department of Education in 2017. What they found is these skills are one of the strongest predictors of success both in school and in life, which does make sense because these are the skills that help us reach our goals. But one of the more surprising findings that they found is that when they measured these executive function skills in college students, that was actually a better predictor of their college graduation than things like their intelligence or their IQ, their economic status growing up, and almost any other factor. These executive function skills, when you're transitioning to independence, they really matter a lot. They are one of the strongest predictors of success, and that's why we put so much hard work into them. All right, so let's start best case scenario. We just finished a successful semester. What can we do after this semester? And again, these can also be done after an unsuccessful semester, but the conversations are much more rich and easier to have after a successful semester. So the first one, and we often forget about this independence piece. The big picture goal is to raise healthy, independent kids who become adults. Sometimes we forget about that when we get caught up in GPA, in grades, and extracurriculars. We forget what we're really after. I really like this mental framework from How to Raise an Adult, which is a book by Julie Lightcott-Hames. And she talks about what are the steps from taking a child from being dependent on you to being independent. So if we look at something like maybe our students had a successful semester and turned in more homework than the previous semester, what we want to do is start to transition, as a ton of oversight from us to more independence to them. I know something we battle with a lot of our college students is something like doing laundry. Many of them do not know how to do laundry. Well, if we wanted to start this independence now, how it would look would be at first, for most of their life, we do their laundry for them. Then we do it with them. We watch them do it once or twice, and then they have the skills to do it independently. Whether they decide to do it or not, I guess, is on them, but at least they have the skills and the know-how on how to do it. So the question to ask yourself is, after a successful semester, what can we do to transition one or two things more independently from our students and really ease off? These are the steps needed to get there. I do, we do, you do. I spoke to this before, but this is the metacognition self-assessment piece. The ultimate gift that we can give our kids is for the ability for them to understand themselves and to understand how their brain works. I know myself and many other of the mentors that Untapped who struggled academically, we didn't have this understanding until way later on. The challenge here is that everyone's brain works differently, especially kids who are neurodivergent. So how do we get to this self-assessment, this self-understanding piece? After a successful semester or a successful final exam or a successful test, what we can do is we can ask a lot of questions. So questions like, when you were studying for the test, how many days in advance did you start studying? How frequent were your breaks? How long were your focus sessions? Did you study better in a group or by yourself? Did you go to office hours? When we ask a lot of questions, it helps them reflect on their learning, and we'll start to see patterns over time, and then we'll start to figure out what really works for them. Again, this is really what we're after here is this metacognition piece. These are skills that they're going to need for the rest of their life. I like to be concrete. So here's a concrete example of a great self-assessment or metacognition activity that I picked up. This is from the dean at the Carlisle School of Mines. And if you know anything about School of Mines, it's a phenomenal engineering university. They have some very, very bright young people, and they do this almost after as many tests possible their freshman year. So they do a reflection. So the first thing they do on this reflection is they list out everything that they did in class that was related to the test or the exam. Next, they go through their independent pre-test activities. What did they do to study before the test? Then they look at their test and figure out what went well, what did they do a good job studying for, and what didn't go well. What gaps were made from the pre-test process to the test. And then based on this, you can see a really nice visual of what adjustments you need to make or what practices that you can double down on to be a more effective studier. If you need a framework, this is a great example. And again, this can be done for anything. It can be done for after an athletic game, after a musical, after a robotics club, whatever we're trying to get self-assessment on, we can look at our preparation process, how the activity went, and then we can make adjustments and improve and improve. Again, after a successful semester, this is a much easier conversation. How to study. This was our most common question last year, both from parents and from students in session, was how do I study? No one feels like they know how to study right now. And so here's the research on how to study, especially if you have an ADHD or one of these executive function challenges. The first thing we want is short, frequent, spaced out study sessions. This is how we get information from short-term to long-term memory. 10 minutes on Monday, 10 minutes on Tuesday, 10 minutes on Wednesday, and so on. Well, that will get the information in long-term memory rather than cramming right before the test. It seems like common sense to a lot of adults, but sometimes it doesn't to our students. The next is this notion of active recall. So when we told students at Untapped to study, we noticed right away what they did was that they just reread and repeat their notes over and over. If you think about what a test or an exam is, they're asking you to take the information out of your brain and do something with it. Answer a multiple choice question, write an essay, and so on. Well, when you just reread, you're not actively recalling and manipulating the information. So we need to practice just like the test. So how can we do active recall to get ready for this test? The first thing we can do is connect any information to prior knowledge. Again, this really helps with getting things in a long-term memory. And so connecting to prior knowledge really makes this information stick. Next, weirdly enough, we want to make the information visual when possible. A lot of people who are high-level studiers will doodle or find other ways to make the information visual. It's hitting different parts of the brain, and so they're more likely to remember it, and it makes studying more enjoyable. I'm going to come back to this note card one-pager concept in a second, but this is a great way to make studying less anxiety provoking. Next, we can quiz ourselves, and the best way to do it is to get quizzed by someone else or to teach the material. A lot of our students can get defensive when they're asked to teach the material to someone else, but this is the deepest understanding is if you can teach it to someone else, well, that means you really know it. So, and then reflection, like that self-assessment activity throughout the process. Here's an example of what a one-pager or a note card looks like. This works really well for several reasons. So when we're asked to take information and to get all that information on a test into a one-pager or a note card, we have to synthesize the information. When you synthesize the information and make something big smaller, that's a great part of the learning process. So let's say we had a high-level exam, a college exam over chapters 1 through 3 in calculus. Well, if I can take all the information and I can boil it down into a note card or a one-pager, I'm likely going to remember it. Also, when final exams come, instead of studying a bunch of chapters, we'll call it 12 chapters, I'm only studying 3 or 4 one-pagers. And then on top of that, when someone tells you to study, it can be really anxiety producing because there's no clear beginning and no clear ending to the task. This gives really clear structure around the task of studying. So here's what a great one-pager or note card has. It's got visuals that's connected to prior knowledge. There's color coding if that works for your student. There's a connection of ideas. So we're actively recalling the information, not just repeating it. And it's just very visual and easy to look at. So a great method for studying, especially if you struggle with anxiety. Those are methods that work well after a successful semester. Let's talk about if a semester did not go as planned, where we can start. I want to start with a few mindsets because it can be really overwhelming when it feels like there's a lot to quote unquote fix. The first mindset is for parents. And this is just a reminder that we live in an achievement-based culture and in community. People are posting on social media about how well their kids are doing in grades, and it can feel really lonely and isolating as a parent when your student is struggling. I've had significant academic struggles, and many mentors that Untapped have, and many successful people that I've met in the community have had very real academic struggles. But they found a way to turn those struggles into learning. And it can be a great gift if you work hard to make that setback an opportunity. There's a lot of learning that occurs. One of the core things you hear about people who are successful, who used to struggle in school, is they talk about how much resilience they developed throughout the process. When school comes easy to you, often we don't develop much resilience. And when we get into the real world, it can seem chaotic and challenging. Well, for someone like me and many other mentors on Untapped who had significant struggles, we developed this resilience early on. If we let these struggles become an opportunity and we work very hard, well, we see a lot of resilience and bounce back, and a lot of these soft skills develop. And then finally, just normalizing it to our students can be very helpful. Is normalizing the struggle. A lot of us go through this. Again, we have to work hard to get out of it. There's no way around that, but it does happen, and there is an opportunity to grow here. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that. A lot of us here have struggled, and there is an opportunity. The next piece, and I want to dive into the research quickly on what actually improves executive function skills. When we go through a challenging semester, we often want to jump to the top of this pyramid. We want to get a 504 plan, accommodations, maybe we want different organizational strategies. We want to overhaul everything. Well, the things at the top of this pyramid can be very helpful, and they are helpful. But what gives us the most bang for our buck is focusing on the bottom of this pyramid. Right now in neuroscience, we can't tell if some of our students have ADHD or they're just sleep deprived because sleep deprivation and ADHD have the exact same symptoms. There's a fuzziness, there is a challenge paying attention, there's a challenge with memory. And so the first thing we want to focus on is sleep. Are we getting the sleep we needed? Do we have enough hours? It's 8 to 10 for most students, especially teenagers. And so, do we have a good sleep routine? That's where we start. Next is exercise or movement. There is so much research coming out on what movement does for the brain, especially the ADHD brain, and how helpful that can be and how helpful that is with focus. So making sure we have enough of that. Routines, which we're going to talk about more, and structure. When school gets challenging, we want to focus on the bottom of the pyramid because it'll give us the biggest bang for our buck. This is always my least favorite slide to talk about, but I feel like I need to talk about it. The typical student with executive function challenges gets about 20,000 more negative comments than positive comments by the age of 10, and then we see it go up quickly from there. Especially when you're in a challenging time in your academic career, it seems like we get nonstop negative feedback. I know with the students I work with, I'm just as guilty as everyone else on this, but a reminder, whenever we can give positive reinforcement, that keeps them with us when we're trying to do hard things and overhaul and turn this around. So the optimal is, two positive per every negative. Obviously, that's very challenging in life, but we want to give two pats on the back, one kick in the tail. It's a great thing to remember when life gets hard that positive reinforcements are very helpful. Keep in mind that your child is going to need you for a long time. I think of a lot of parents in middle school and high school don't realize that these children are going to need you for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and we don't want to see any relationships get damaged during a challenging academic time. So keep in mind how helpful positive reinforcement can be, please. The next one is executive function deficits are not the same thing as character. These two often get confused. When you're running behind or late, or when you don't turn in an assignment, people always categorize you as, or people can categorize you as disrespectful, rude, lazy, or all these negative character traits. That's just not true. These are executive function skills, and these are skills that can be improved. They are not your character. Well, what we want to keep in mind is that when you have an executive function challenge, you have lower than typical amounts of dopamine in your frontal lobe of your brain. What that means is that tasks or assignments that we don't find exciting are twice as hard for us to start. That's not an excuse because we still need to figure out how to be productive and how to get things done. But the opposite is also true. We have this thing called hyperfocus, and you may have seen this in yourself or in your students. When we find something exciting, we get twice as into it. And this is where, real life rewards you for getting really good at one thing versus middle school and high school, which rewards you for being good at 6 or 7 different things. So again, we need to build in systems, but just having the understanding that their brains are built differently can be helpful. Next, it's just a brain difference. We need to build in systems and habits and routines. It has nothing to do with laziness or willpower. And then sometimes with these challenges, even when we have the best intentions, I know there's been many projects I've worked on in my life for school where I give it my all, and maybe I miss something on the rubric or a piece in the directions, and I still get a C minus. Sometimes I have great intentions and the outcome doesn't match, and that's infuriating for everybody, not just parents, but also for kids. I can't emphasize this enough. These deficits are not your character. There's nothing wrong, but we do have work to do to improve these skills, and that's what they are, just skills. So those are the mindsets. What are practical things we can do while we're struggling? Well, the first one is getting very clear on expectations. Most of your children are black and white in this stage in life. What I mean by that is if expectations aren't incredibly clear and they're somewhat gray, we're either not going to do them, not going to do them well, or we're going to argue. And so getting really clear at the beginning of the semester, what is your definition for success for this semester? Is it going to 90% of the classes? Is it a 95% homework turn-in rate? Is it all B pluses and above? Getting very clear on what your definition of success is and making sure everyone is on the same page at the very beginning. When we work towards whatever goal you have, let's say it's turn in 95% of your homework, then we're going to talk about what routines to build in a second. But when they accomplish that routine, let's say your family decides to do 30 minutes at the kitchen table every single night of homework. Well, when that routine happens, what type of small positive reinforcements can we give? Is it 10 minutes extra out with friends on a Friday night for every night they complete their routine? Is it something else? But what kind of small positive reinforcements can we give to keep our students with us and to build this habit? And then what accountability happens if they don't complete it? Do they have an extra hour in the Untapped Homework Center? Do they have to go to office hours on Wednesday morning? Having a very clear expectations up front about what is success, what are the positives, and what's the accountability, and making sure that we stick to these is paramount. The next piece of turning things around is routines. Why routines are so valuable for people with executive function challenges is it's very hard for us to just get through school. Often we need all the brain power we have just to get through the day. So routines switch the brain from thinking hard to autopilot. And this is what we're trying to do and really reduce decision fatigue here. We don't want to have to think because that's when procrastination happens and that's when we drain our mental energy. So let's say it's a college student and they're struggling with productivity and procrastination. If we can help them build a routine where they go to the campus coffee shop at 2 p.m. every single day, and they're disciplined enough to stay off their phone there and use that coffee shop for productivity and productivity only, they have a clear routine. What do we see? We see this routine significantly reduce stress and anxiety because they're not always trying to get started and they know they're going to get things done. They've built out the time for it. We see increased focus and organization. No matter how poor your attention is, if we have a productivity space after 3 or 4 times there, well, we see attention get much better. And then we're after the long run. We're after confidence and discipline in the long run. So, what routines can we build? Maybe it's a bedtime routine. Maybe it's laying your clothes out before bed so mornings start easier. What routines can we build this semester that's going to take a lot of stress and anxiety and increase focus and organization for your student? Now, here's the challenge is if we implement too many routines at once, and often it seems like there's a lot challenging going on after an unsuccessful semester, we know that things are going to fall apart. So too many routines lead to things falling apart. So we want to understand this concept of the lead domino. The lead domino is if you were to implement one routine and one routine only, what routine could you implement that would give you the biggest bang for your buck? It is not going to fix everything, but it's going to have a very positive trickle-down effect. So the two easy examples of lead dominoes are sleep and movement. If you move for 15 minutes a day, well, your attention and learning gets better. Your mood is better. Often you don't feel like eating like junk. You have more self-confidence. All these other things happen because of one routine you created. So that's what a lead domino is, and that's one thing we can focus on. The challenge is once we get past and sleep and exercise, the challenge is finding that lead domino. Again, when a lot is challenging academically, how do we find the one routine that's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck? Well, the way to do this is to brain dump all the challenges out. Your student can do it, or you can do it, or you can do it together. But brain dump all of the challenges out. This will often take a while, especially students think they're done pretty quickly. We do it on the big whiteboards at Untapped. Take some time. We think we're done after 1 or 2 minutes, and then we sit there in awkward silence, and things still start to trickle out a couple minutes later, but get it all out. You'll see right away the shoulders drop and anxiety goes away because the brain is for having ideas and not holding ideas, and simply getting everything out feels good. After that, we can categorize some of the similar challenges, and then we can start to build a routine that will not solve everything on there, but will give us the biggest bang for our buck, that will make a few of those things better. So that's how we find our lead domino. This is something I've done at least every 9 weeks in my life, and I can't tell you how much of a game changer it's been for me and so many other people. One of the common, oh, excuse me, before I get into that, let's talk about lead domino examples we've seen in the past that have worked really well beyond sleep and exercise. So, as a student, going to office hours, especially in high school and college, is very helpful. Your teacher, TA, or professor knows you're invested, and when they know you're invested, they're more likely to be on your side. We don't spend all this time procrastinating. We're not off task. We know exactly what to study. A lot happens when we go to office hours. That's a great lead domino. 15 minutes of movement after school, especially for those students that are crawling out of their skin. Some type of movement activity versus being on their phone or their iPad works very well and resets them, whether they're doing homework or not. 3 times per week organization. That's both physical organization of our backpack, our folders, our binders, and digital organization, especially for students who struggle with turning in assignments. We find a lot of completed things, whether it's in their Google Drive or in their backpack. So doing this 3 times per week has saved a lot of heartache and a lot of redoing missing assignments and a lot of family tension. And then finally, I know I struggled significantly with attention growing up. And so no one taught me how to pay attention, but everyone told me over and over that I needed to pay attention. Finally, I had a teacher teach me the framework for paying attention, and that's SLANT, which stands for sit up, listen, ask and answer one question per week, nod your head and track the speaker. That's what paying attention in a classroom looks like. And even when my attention fades in and out during class, the teacher thinks I'm invested and the class just seems to go much better for me. So these are examples of lead dominoes that we've seen in students and in my life that have worked well. As a parent, what are lead dominoes that routines we could have for ourselves that seem to improve many different things? One is a nightly walk, and this one's hard. When the weather gets a little nicer, a nightly walk with your student, we'll say for 5 minutes, and you're not allowed to ask about school. Again, these kids need you for a long time, and making it solely about school, we start to get defensive. So having a nightly walk and just talking about life and getting to know them more so than you already do, that's a great lead domino that we've seen a lot of relationships improve. The next is Sunday night planning, taking the time, we'll say Sunday night at 7 p.m. at the kitchen table to look ahead of the week. What family commitments, what practices, what after school activities do we have? It actually does a lot for the brain. It teaches the ADHD brain or the brain that struggles with the executive function skills how to look ahead, how to plan ahead, how to think ahead. It doesn't seem like much, but this simple skill of planning, it's something that a lot of our college students just don't have right now. So Sunday night planning improves a lot. And then you have access to the homework center and Untapped, taking the time to use that and taking the pressure off of the family. That can be a great lead domino, and you can make it here as well. Those are lead dominoes we've seen that have worked very well. The common question I get is, well, I'm trying these routines and these lead dominoes, but they always seem to fail. How how do we make them stick? Well, routines fail for several reasons. The first is that we try too many routines at once. Again, when we try a lot, it can go well for a little bit, but usually it falls apart later on. We want to pick one or two core routines, lead dominoes that we stick to. The next is our routines can be too ambitious, too big, and they can feel overwhelming after a while, or they can be too complex. So the framework that I use is from a Stanford behavioral psychologist named BJ Fogg. And he has a book called Tiny Habits, which I highly recommend, or at least listening to a podcast that he's on. He talks about when people institute tiny habits, they're more likely to stick. So he gives ridiculous examples, like in the lab at Stanford, they had some of the participants in his studies had a goal of flossing. So he had one group who flossed. He said, this is your goal, is to keep a flossing habit. And then he had another group where he had them floss just one tooth per night. Well, the group that flossed just one tooth per night, they were more likely to have a full flossing habit stick over time than the flossing group. It didn't overwhelm the brain to start the habit or start the routine, and it, went on to autopilot and just stuck over time. Same thing when they had a group do things like one push-up versus getting in shape. They started small to go fast. They were simple, non-complex, one routines at a time, and counterintuitively, it seems to work really well. So that could be a great framework for routines and getting routines to stick. The last thing that I want to share about after an unsuccessful semester is that as adults, as parents, as people who just care about these kids, we want to constantly push. We want to improve, improve, improve. Well, we're finding that the brain works very similar to muscles. Most people understand that if you were to lift weights or go for a run or do something physically strenuous, you're stressing your muscles out, but they won't grow back stronger unless you rest them. The brain seems to work the exact same way. So if we have a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being you're basically asleep, and 10 means you've never focused so hard in your life, we want to help our students get to a 7 or 8 and really focus deeply, and then come off to a 2 or a 3. Most students we're seeing in most kids nationwide right now are functioning at a 5 or 6 throughout their day. They're they're looking at the material, not all the way in, and then they're on their phone scrolling, not all the way in. And so we're functioning at a 5, and we just don't get information to long-term memory, and it leads to burnout, difficulties with engagement, and difficulties with memory and retention. Remember, when we're studying or when we're learning any material, we want to have been focusing hard, but then we want to take a rest period. So stress plus rest equals growth. So that's what I have for everybody. I would like to take the time now to answer a few questions that were in the chat or asked to us confidentially. The first one is office hours. So my student has anxiety going to office hours. How can I reduce their fear of office hours? There's two things that come to mind for this. One, I know one of the first things that we do with a lot of our students is we put in their drafts of their email, we put a script at the beginning of every single semester. And this is how to email a teacher or a professor or someone else. If you need a copy of the script, please let me know and I can get that to you. But we put a copy of the script and then they can just copy and paste that and rephrase that however they want. And this has reduced a lot of anxiety with students, just knowing they have this script. So helping them write an email, giving them a draft, they may already have one. And so using that is a great place to start. The next is when we have a clear reason to go into office hours, we typically do very well. Where the anxiety comes from is that often we don't know how to advocate, we don't know what to ask, and it just feels really overwhelming. If your child will let you role play with them, just even the first line, that takes away a lot of anxiety. So having a clear, scripted one question to ask, first question, has been really helpful for a lot of students, and then they start to feel comfortable. And then if they do go, a lot of positive reinforcement. We know the best way to deal with anxiety is exposure therapy. And so we want to give small exposures a little bit over time to help them build up to confidence. And so maybe it's just a lot of positive reinforcement about going just for one question or emailing the question and then showing up for the office hours. I know many professors that we work with would be very okay with this. So a lot of positive reinforcement and then planning in advance. Great question. The next one ties into it. My student is having difficulty advocating. What can I do to help? Using the scripts, using the questions. Role plays best, but sometimes students can get defensive to that. But talking through with them when to approach their teacher, especially if they're in middle school or high school, so they're not like interrupting them, and the words to use, even if you're just modeling it, we've seen a lot of benefit from. So role playing, practice with scripts, um, yeah. And then also, if there is a non-intimidating way to do it, like in office hours where there's not many students in the classroom, that tends to feel a lot better as well. And as always, tons of positive reinforcement when they do that. We want to reinforce this behavior. It's not about the outcome, it's about the process. Last question is what boundaries should I set around expectations? When does external incentives become counterproductive or enabling? That's a great question and one that we always struggle with. So the goal here is for an internal sense of confidence or accomplishment. And so when you get, so I'll answer the first question is what boundaries should I set around expectations? The boundaries, usually the best boundaries come from an authentic conversation with your child saying, I expect we'll say 3.5 GPA. And if they're like, that's way too high because of X, Y, and Z, having a real conversation, hearing their side, them hearing your side, and finding, well, what are the boundaries? And you may stick to your GPA, but at least they know why, and at least they know you have their future in mind. Um, Compromise is always best if that's possible, but it may not be. So the boundaries should be something that are agreed upon and that you are going to stick to. Make sure that's very important. The next one is the external versus internal. Um, Pay for good grades. This is such a hotly debated topic in the field right now. I don't typically recommend paying for good grades. Um, you know, we want to give positive reinforcement, but we also want to give quick feedback loops that are typically not around pay, like extra time with friends or something that they care about that will foster skills that we want them to have, like more social time and things like that. So I typically stay away from money on that. The other thing too is I see a lot of families, give a certain amount of money for an A and a certain amount for a B in the class. Keep in mind that when you have one of these executive function deficits, we need quick feedback loops. That's too far away for a lot of us. Between now and May, what might as well be an infinite amount of time for our kids. They're probably not going to work hard on their homework tonight to try to get that amount of money for a final grade in May. So, um, hopefully that answered your question, but quick feedback loops based on, behaviors that we want them to have more of, like social time, I think are ideal if they're up for that. If they're not up for that, because that's a general answer, please email me and I'm happy to give you more recommendations because I know that this is a challenging one and the video games one is always a challenging one too. So I'm happy to have that conversation with you if needed. What sort of incentives do your mentors use with students? Great question. A lot of what we do is relationship based and positive reinforcement. We work very hard on the relationships here. And so that positive reinforcement, we want it to mean something. I know one of the pieces that we're working harder on with our mentors is the accountability piece and keeping the students later if they don't take care of business. And so we've been working really hard on that behind the scenes. If you feel like that needs to happen, feel free to talk to your mentor. Feel free to talk to me if you feel like that accountability isn't as strong as you would like it. But the incentives we used are very relationship based, and that's why we work so hard on the relationship up front, is because we want that positive reinforcement to mean something. When they hit a goal of completing 2 or 3 assignments per week or not having a missing assignment, that positive reinforcement, we want that to really feel good and start to develop those internal disciplines. And so we do not use any external incentives here. It's nothing but positive reinforcement. And again, that's why we work really hard in this relationship. So thank you for the kind comments. Where can I find more resources on these topics? If you want to take a deep dive, um, some of the books I highly recommend are Atomic Habits, Tiny Habits, those two for routines. Atomic Habit gets all the love, but Tiny Habits is a great resource for a lot of our families. If you're interested about the movement and you want to take a deep dive into that, Spark by Dr. John Rady is a good one. Um, and if you had other resources in mind, don't hesitate to email me. But we also put a ton of stuff on our YouTube channel and our social media about former students who many people would be surprised how much they struggled and they did the right things over a long amount of time. And it seemed to work out. We interview a lot of our former students, and a lot of them had a really challenging time in middle school and high school. And so we constantly put out little short videos and and clips about people in our community as well. So that could be a resource for you as well. So speaking of, there's all of our information. And most importantly, there is my email. A lot of these questions are personal and it's hard to give general answers sometimes. It's much more beneficial when I can give a very targeted answer. So if you're stuck on anything I said or something didn't quite make sense, you have access to me when you need me. So don't hesitate to reach out. There's also our information if you're looking for those clips and parent resources. As always, I can't thank you enough for being a part of Untapped. It really is an honor to work with your student. Thank you so much for trusting us. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if I can help. Have a great night. Thank you.